Welcome everyone to episode 8 of Ty's Training Talking with My Dad. This is the week of February 10th, 2025, and I'm Ty, and here, as always, with my wonderful co-host and father, Tim Andrews, aka Mr. C, for another look at training and life ahead of Project Himalaya. Before we dive into everything, a quick favor, guys, if you're watching this, listening to this, reading this, please, first of all, just if you like it, tell a friend. Word of mouth is like the most popular way that podcasts kind of take off. And we've seen a really great reaction so far and some great feedback. Also, send us your feedback. And again, if you like it and you want to help out, do that whole like, comment, subscribe thing. It's really cheesy, but it absolutely works. So please tell someone about us, like, comment, subscribe on whatever platform you're on. It will really help us grow this podcast and keep bringing you this awesome content. So that's my little preamble. And now, Mr. C, how are you? You're in a different place, finally home. How is it?
Yeah, it's good. It's good. We had actually a lovely little enforced extra vacation, but it's nice to be home, see the cats, and be here. It's winter here, so we've had a lot of snow and ice and rain and pretty awful weather. But we're inside and comfortable, and it's nice to be home.
Excellent. Good to hear. All right. Well, let's dive into it.
So let's get started as we usually do and give us sort of the overview and the numbers and the totals for the week.
Yeah. So totals, it was a really, really big week. This is the end of our second big block of training. So our kind of 3-ish week block here. So it's 139 kilometers, 31 hours and 44 minutes of training time. And in that was 16,394 meters of vert, which is definitely my biggest vert week ever. So that's always a nice thing to hit, a vert PR. So that was fun. And Mr. C, I know you'll ask metric to English. That is over 50,000 feet. I looked it up. I think 10
miles.
15,300 meters is 50,000 feet. So almost 1,000 meters over that. So that's as like a stats and numbers nerd kind of guy, like that like scratches a nice itch.
Yeah. So you may be too young, but do you remember the famous Rocky movie?
Yeah, of course.
So, the famous scene there is he runs up all those steps in front of Philadelphia town hall. Right? It's just like, okay, he's got nothing. He's got no game at all.
Maybe like 15 meters. It's like 50 feet. Yeah, and then I'd say week overall went super well. If we want to do like a high and low, I think the low point was probably it's just been a little bit rainy the last few days. And the result is that the mountain and the trails are really, really wet. And actually this morning I was coming down the mountain bike trail and took a corner too fast and just legs completely went out from under me. And I slid like into first base in baseball, just like slid fully on my side and butt and realized I was sliding into a puddle that was like 80% cow poop. So that was cool. But highlight, just such a really.
But you're okay,
really,
right? I mean, that must have been
totally
a little scary.
It's grass. It's grass. It's soft. So that's no problem. And then, highlight I think was just 2 really, really good workouts this week, and then huge week. And mostly my best friend Connor is here from Massachusetts. He came down and spending about a week down here in Ecuador with me, and it's great to have company after a lot of my kind of monk, hiding from everybody training. So it's very nice to have a good friend here.
Absolutely. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Then without further ado, let's dive in. So
let's do it.
So you've been using this crazy oxygen mask, oxygen mask is the wrong term, mask, hypoxia creator, altitude generator. Can you explain what you're doing there and what you've learned so far?
Yeah, it's been really interesting experimenting with it up here. And we've talked about it, I think, the last 2 episodes now, because I started out before Cayambe, and then with Connor coming down, we were talking about going to Cotopaxi National Park, which is home to Cotopaxi volcano, the big iconic volcano here in Ecuador. So we're going to try and do that this coming week. And so I, again, wanted to kind of keep just experimenting with altitude and doing some more hypoxic training here in Quito, and then being able to compare my experience here using the hypoxic generator with my experience on the mountain itself at actual high altitude. So basically the first week or maybe 10 days, I kept it at, I think, around 5,800. And then I just cranked it up another 1,000 meters in the last week or so. And it's been really interesting because I saw this twice now, which is a very quick, like within a couple of days, reaction of drop in heart rate, increase in O2 sat, and just decrease in perceived effort. So there's definitely something that happens really quickly within a couple of days that is a real physiological reaction to that very limited exposure. Because again, I'm only spending about 45 minutes a day. I'm doing a 45-minute little spin down on my bike every afternoon, and that's where I'm doing this hypoxic training. So super low exposure, but you're seeing pretty significant, pretty profound reactions quite quickly. So that's really, really interesting. And the other thing I found was going back down. So, you know, after spending a week biking up at 6,700 or something, and then going back down to 5.8, that actually felt quite good. So, and I also wonder if even my normal training here, you know, in keto, which is about 3,000 meters, and then up to Ruku, which is 4.7, you know, that's all going really, really well. So I wonder if there's some kind of trickle down effects as well, where that exposure to much greater hypoxia and higher simulated altitude is kind of affecting all of the lower down things. So definitely it's still like a lot more data to be gathered because it's only been 2 or 3 weeks, but I'm really interested. There's not a lot of information about this kind of stuff. So for me, with my like engineer and science hat on, it's been really fun to play around with.
Experiment of one, I guess.
Experiment of one. Yeah. We keep going back to that.
Yep.
And 100% this is that. I mean, this is not real science. It's total anecdotal, and it's a sample size of n equals 1, which is very bad, but like if I'm the one and it's working, like even if it's placebo, it's, well, you know, it's,
yes and
happening.
No, but there's as we say in biology, the mechanisms of action are sort of understood. So it's not just like blindly trying some random act. You're doing something that is known to increase your ability to be efficient at higher altitude, and it seems to be working. So whether it's placebo or not, who cares, right? If it's
exactly.
It's working.
Exactly. Yep. So
great.
It's
great.
It's been really fun, and I'm excited to get out to Cotopaxi next week and kind of see how it again compares to real life altitude. That will be that, because that's the thing that really matters at the end of the day. All this is preparing for being able to move at real altitude. Like, it doesn't matter if you can do cool stuff with a hypoxic generator. What matters is, does it translate to actually being able to move quickly uphill in big mountains at a high altitude? Because that's Project Himalaya. That's what we're talking about, you know?
Okay. So on Tuesday, you wrote that you had a great workout and you knew it was going to be great before you started. And you said that was kind of unusual. So what made you think this was going to be a good workout? Or has this happened before? Are there things that you notice?
I don't know, honestly, that day. I just, you know, and like maybe you've had this with tennis or golf, which I know are your two big sports, but some days you just wake up and you're like, I can just tell that this is going to be a good day. Like physically, like my body just feels ready to perform really well. And it's not like I was rested. Like, you know, this has been a very big block of training. I've got a ton of accumulated fatigue in my body. So it's not like I was fresh or poppy or anything like that. It was just this sensation of like, okay, I feel really ready to go today. Like my head was in a good spot. My body felt really good. And I was just excited. I was mentally very excited for the workout. And that is not super common. I feel like I usually have a very pragmatic and realistic approach to, okay, like if I did that last week, I think I can do this week. And everything is kind of a stepping stone. And it's all very, you know, programmized, I guess, to an extent, in that each workout kind of leads to the next one. And usually you see this very, very gentle line of progression, which is what you want. And also sometimes in training, again, I'm sure you've experienced this in your sports, where you have like these kind of plateaus where you see very, very small incremental gains. And then all of a sudden it's like a step change. And it's just like something clicks, either mentally or physiologically or in a skill sport, neuromuscularly, whatever it is. But something clicks all of a sudden, and then you make a big jump. And I find that does happen on this kind of like medium scale with running, where sometimes you'll have like, okay, a little bit, and then a big jump. And that's what Tuesday's workout was. You know, we're talking about, you know, a couple of minutes over a, you know, 50-ish minute trail, which might not sound like a lot, but to me, I know what every minute means on that trail. So to drop 2 minutes in a week is huge for me. And having that sense of excitement, well-being, be feeling really ready, and then having it manifest in the workout itself is an incredibly just fun and satisfying feeling. So
Nice.
it was a really, really good day. And it definitely, we talked about last week, I was super sick at the beginning of the week. And I think now I feel 100% over that and just, okay, my mojo is definitely back, and I'm excited to, wrap this block up this week and, take a little recovery, and then we'll talk about next week as well and kind of what's coming up, and dive back into it.
Yeah. Well, I've definitely had that experience. I think, you mentioned mind and body, and I think that's one, there are a couple of things. One is when your mind and body are sort of, it's almost like they tell you in yoga or in meditation, when your mind and body are in sync, that's a good sign. That means, you really, something's going well. And part of it may just be that you felt your recovery more clearly. So you're recovering better because your ability to, as you said, you've reached a new plateau of fitness. So both your recovery and your ability are just at a higher average level. That makes you much more confident, especially mentally, if you sort of begin to feel it. So I've certainly had that feeling. It reminds me very much of music, actually, too.
Yeah, that too. That's actually a really good point.
Very similar. You play and play and play and you plateau. That's often the term musicians will use, just plateau for a long time. And then all of a sudden you feel like, holy smokes, I just made this big jump that all of a sudden I can, do things and perform things that I couldn't do a few months ago and that I thought I'd never do. It just feels like you've run into a brick wall. So always a good feeling too when you make that jump, and hopefully it will last, and you'll have a couple more even potentially before you get to Project Himalaya. Great.
Yeah.
All right. So then there was the Gary comment that you had to stop up at the top and put on a new sticker for Gary. So what the hell is that about?
Yeah, so this is a thing in my family. Do you actually not know about this, or is this just
Well,
part
I guess
of what
I
we're talking
sort of
about?
have heard about it around the edges. It's mostly you and your brother, so no.
Yeah.
I don't
So
really
I
know
won't
the
dox
story.
I won't dox my brother publicly, as we now have a few thousand listeners. But basically, my brother is a nerd and hacker and has some nerd hacker friends, and one of them is this guy Gary. And he and his nerd hacker friends like to troll each other. And so the way that they troll their friend Gary is they've got like these stickers printed out of his face. And they hand them out to their like friends and family all over the world. And like I, as the kind of like crazy uncle of our family and group, like am the one that's in the craziest places often. So I get a bunch of these stickers with this guy Gary's face, who, by the way, I've never even met Gary, but this guy Gary, I have a bunch of stickers with his face on him, and actually Connor just brought some more down. And my brother's given me the great responsibility of placing Gary in very epic locations around the world. So there's some Garys in the high Himalaya in Nepal. There's some Garys on some big mountains, like on summit signs and stuff, like way up in the Andes and just all over the world in crazy places. Only where there are other stickers. I don't ever want to vandalize beautiful places, but when there's like big walls with stickers, there's usually a Gary there if I'm there. And so long story short, there's a big what do you call it? Like a big metal sign at the top of Ruku where I run up like almost every day, and lots of stickers on it. So I put a Gary sticker up there a couple weeks ago, and then I come back a few weeks later and someone had put their sticker over Gary, and I'm like, that's rude. So then next day, obviously, come back up, put Gary back in his right place. So he has returned to the top of Quito. Gary is here in Ecuador. Yep.
Okay.
We try to keep things
now
fun.
We know the story of Gary. Okay. So let's talk about data. You've covered a lot. You were talking in particular, you had some problems with your pulse ox, your pulse oximeter that measures your oxygen flow, especially when you're using your altitude thingy, I'll call it as a technical term. And you started looking at your heart rate. You talked at some point about how just by changing your breathing rate, it had a big impact. So how do you collect this data? How important is this data collection? And are there any particular pieces or patterns that are really standing out as the most important?
So the data that I'm collecting right now that I'd say are the most important are heart rate, altitude. Um, I pay a little bit of attention to like mechanical breathing rate, literally how quickly I'm breathing, and then pulse oximeter. And I would say these are mostly limited to the kind of weird altitude experiment stuff that we're doing. Outside, it's really the basic metrics. It's heart rate and then, speed as measured by vert or horizontal distance. On the bike and with the altitude generator, it's more about trying to figure out how is my body reacting to the hypoxia. So one of the things I've found is that the pulse ox kind of commercial versions that you can buy, at least, and I've tried a bunch at this point, they're really not that good. They're pretty noisy. They really don't work very well if you are either outside and not completely still, which I am both of those things when I'm on the bike, because my bike setup is out on my porch here. So that's not fantastic. And it's hard to get good data. Like I got a brand new one because I dropped mine on the ground and it broke because I'm an idiot. And a brand new one, like it was literally giving me readings anywhere from like 52, which is like you're dead, to like 95, which is you're fine, like at sea level pretty much. So it's a random number generator effectively. It's really not that helpful. Like I got a couple of readings that I'm like, okay, that kind of matches my perceived effort or I perceived sense of whatever hypoxia, like, because I have a pretty good sense of that now. But it's like, okay, if I'm taking 5 measurements and one of them is maybe okay, it's just not that helpful of a tool. So I've kind of stopped using it so much and been looking more just at heart rate as an indicator, along with just general sense of fatigue and hypoxia, which again, I've been doing this enough now that I have a pretty good sense of how bad it feels, literally just objectively or subjectively, excuse me. So heart rate has been the one where I can kind of keep track of it. And again, because I'm on a stationary bike with a trainer that I can set the wattage, so it's a fixed wattage, so I know exactly how much power output I have. And then in theory, the same wattage should require the same heart rate. And then if the heart rate is going down from, day to day or week to week, then to me that says, okay, you're probably getting a little bit more acclimated to the altitude. So that's kind of what I've been paying attention to. And I have seen that correlation as I make the, simulated altitude higher, the heart rate goes up a little bit. And when I bring it down, it goes down. And as I get more acclimated, it kind of does a little bit of a, logarithmic decay thing. So it's been really interesting. And those are definitely the ones that I pay the most attention to. I think, like, I would love to, like, my Garmin in theory, and full disclosure, I'm sponsored by Garmin. My Garmin Forerunner in theory is supposed to be able to do pulse ox like in the watch. I don't know. Does your Apple Watch do it? You have an Apple Watch, right, Mr.
It
C?
does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They do it, I think,
like,
via infrared. Yeah.
That's something I thought about is like, and Connor actually brought a whole bunch of stuff from America, and he brought me a new Garmin. So I'm going to see if I can set up the pulse ox there, because if I can get an accurate reading, that I think would be really interesting and helpful. But right now it's mostly just a device issue. I just don't get I don't get good data.
Yeah. And I think I certainly wouldn't trust the Apple Watch for a really precise reading, but it seems pretty good. It's, it's not off by, but I've never tried to do something like this either, to really get into a hypoxic environment and see what it does. So they certainly are capable of doing something. And the question is, are they better than a random number generator? And I guess you'll find out.
Yeah, we'll find out. Connor, I
so
think
you
also
mentioned,
has
by
one,
the way,
so
that your trainer bike allows you to set the watts. Is that built into the kind of bike you bought, or did you buy some addition that did that? How does that work?
So my setup, it's a bike trainer, so it's a real bike. It's Greg's bike actually that I just bought from him, and it's one of those triangle things where you hook the back wheel into the trainer, and then it has a phone app that you control it with. So it has a magnetic resistance wheel. So you put a special trainer tire on it, so it has no traction. It's just a smooth thing, and then that spins the magnetic wheel, and then you can control how much resistance that has, and then you can control that's through the app is wattage, and so you can look at wattage, and then it'll show you your cadence. And so it's nice because what it does is it adjusts the resistance based on your cadence. So no matter how fast you pedal, if you put it at 200 watts, it's going to put out 200 watts. So if you pedal really, really fast, it's going to make the resistance lower, but it's the same amount of power
Interesting.
output. And if you pedal slower, it'll make it, the other way. So
So it's got the
it's,
ability to dynamically adjust the
yeah, exactly.
resistance as you're pedaling.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
it's a
nice.
control
Yeah.
system. Yeah. So it's pretty
Yeah. I
cool.
wish
Yeah.
my
I like it a
Elliptigo
lot.
had that.
Yeah. I mean, you could actually set up your Elliptigo on it's called a smart trainer, is like this kind of
Uh-huh.
trainer. Because you basically have smart trainers and dumb trainers, right? A dumb trainer is just a fixed resistance. So the only way that you make it harder is by pedaling faster, or gearing up and then pedaling faster. Whereas a smart trainer, you can adjust the resistance uh, and like actually have it adjust to your cadence, which is pretty cool. So yeah,
Right.
it's a very robust tool. I got it last year when I was coming back from Achilles surgery and on the bike like all the time. Connor actually recommended it because he's way more into cycling than
Nice.
me.
So
So yeah,
another
I think it's a
tip
really
for the
cool tool.
community if you're looking for a good way to train at a constant output, which is a good way to
Yeah,
train. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
And actually, it's cool. Connor, because he's also a nerd, developed a little piece of software where you can use you can use heart rate as the input for your control system. So instead of having a fixed wattage, you can tell it, I want you to keep my heart rate at
Nice.
125. And so then it will
Yep.
actually adjust the wattage. Like, because in
Yep.
theory, like as you get more tired, you'll have some cardiac drift, right? And your heart rate will go up a little
Right.
bit. So
Right.
what you actually want, if you really want to do like a zone 1 session, like a super recovery session, is you might actually want the resistance to go down a little bit over the course of the workout. And you can do that manually if you can keep an eye on it. But Connor built this little piece of software that is, it's just a control system that does it automatically. So yeah, this is the kind of stuff we
Awesome.
nerd out about.
Oh yeah. 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 Okay. All right. Well, we'll raise up a little bit from the nerddom. Um,
Cool.
so speaking of Connor, your
Yeah.
friendly nerd, how is Connor, and how does having Connor, a really good friend and a training partner, because he's also a runner, how does
Yeah.
that change how you go through your daily routines and such?
Yeah. So Connor is one of my best friends here. Well, here, just in the world. And it's really great having him here. I think he's maybe the closest thing I have to like a brother that's not in my family, in the sense that I feel like we can like merge into each other's lives, and we're both very able to share like, hey, this is exactly what I need. Like literally right now, I was like, hey man, I can come over after I record this podcast, because he's getting a tattoo right now, and I was like, I could come over and hang out, but honestly, I'm like really tired. And if you like don't need like company and you're like having a good time, I might just like stay here and eat food and stare at the wall. It's like we have like a very good open ability to like hang out and spend a lot of amazing time together. And also just like we're both a little bit introverted sometimes, especially when we're both training hard, and can just like not take offense at each other, just be like, hey man, I just need some space or whatever. So like it's yeah, it's kind of the best of both worlds, because yeah, he is a fantastic athlete himself. He's a 228 marathoner, and he's done a bunch of really awesome cool mountain stuff with me as well. So like he got in at like 3 a.m. and then at 7 a.m. that morning we were on the Polichowski Trail and went up to 4,500 meters that day. And he's from sea level, which makes no sense. Like he's just a freak at altitude, kind of like me, which is great. And we can just do that together, and it's super fun, because we can share that as both an opportunity to hang out and be social, and also we both are super addicted to exercise and love to work out and be in the mountains and stuff. So yeah, we get along super well, and he's just like a person that I'm so grateful has come into my life, and has been so supportive of me and everything I do, and is willing to come down here and hang out in Quito for leave his wife behind and just hang out with his bro for a bit. So it's a lot of fun.
Yay, Connor.
Yeah, Connor's man.
Okay.
We love Connor.
Yes, he's a great guy. So, okay, so let's talk about Sunday, which is today.
Yeah, we are
You had
recording
a
on Sunday.
huge workout, two big sessions. And
Yeah.
so how did you design this day, and how did it go?
Um, let's see. Well, it definitely went very well. I'd say both sessions went well. I don't think it was that much bigger than any of the other double sessions I've done this block. I maybe like a tiny bit, but I again, everything I do is I try to make it progressive. So like this workout should feel harder than last week's, and it shouldn't be like a huge jump, but it should be a little bit harder. And I think that's how I wrote it. And that said, I do keep in mind what is coming up. And usually it's like, okay, I'm going to have another hard workout in like 2 days. But today I have, it's the end of a block, and we've talked about blocks before. And, I think it was our very first episode. We talked about kind of how we structure training, and it's like, okay, I do 3-week blocks, and then I'll take 3 or 4 days super, super light. So I know that I have 3 days of, like, to me, basically complete rest coming up. So I will be a tiny bit more aggressive in a workout that's literally the last day of the block, just because I know that I have that really strong recovery period, but I'm still not going to do anything totally stupid. So yeah, the idea today was I wanted to do some longer chunks, specifically on Physiological. I wanted to try and do like 50 to 60% at pretty much course record pace, which would be 25 to 30-ish minutes continuous. Up to this point, everything I'd done had been broken up into intervals. So anywhere from like 1 to I think 7-minute reps were like the longest things I'd done. So it is a pretty big jump to go from 7-minute reps to 30 minutes continuous, but it didn't feel totally outrageous. And yeah, it went super, super well. I basically matched almost exactly, like within 10 seconds of the pace that I ran for those 7-minute reps. So again, when you do 7-minute reps for 30 minutes, you have 4 minutes of rest in there. So I basically matched that exact pace for the work with 31 minutes continuous. So that was really, really exciting. I was super stoked with that, and then ran all the way to the summit afterwards. I took a little bit of rest. So I basically split it into 2 chunks with some rest in between. And then ran, I think, it was like 51:13, which is, I think, my second quickest time ever. And only a few seconds off Carl Egloff's old FKT, which up until, 8 months ago had been just totally outrageous to me. So the fact that I can do that in training with 3 minutes of recovery in the middle is like in the middle of like a giant block, super fatigued, like that's a really, really good sign of where I am. And then came back in the afternoon and did some reps on the treadmill here with the altitude setup. So everything was at 6,000 meters effective altitude, and kind of did a similar thing. I think it was a 30-minute rep and then 2 10-minute reps after that. And those also felt super good. They were quicker than I expected. And yeah, just showed, okay, I can obviously move quickly lower down, like at 10 to 13,000 feet. And then also I felt surprisingly very, very good. Again, I was much quicker than I expected at that level of hypoxia. So this is, again, where looking at going to Cotopaxi next week, will that kind of pace that I was able to do on the treadmill, will that hold up on an actual mountain at actually 6,000-ish meters? We'll find out.
Okay, great. So as you said a couple of times, this is the last day of a block, and this block was quite remarkable. You started out at the beginning that you've run basically 10 miles of vert and not standing still, I would say. Very fast. So your fitness seems incredible, off the charts, even for you. How do you balance that with your don't be greedy, stay patient, build towards Project Himalaya?
I don't want to spoil our cooldown, because I think this question leads really well into that, which is about like, can you be too fit too early? And it's a really interesting question. It's something I've been thinking about a lot over the last month, because I definitely have had that issue before. I think patience is the most important word there. And I've said the word progression or progressive or progression a lot of times in this last 30 minutes or so that we've been talking. To me, that is the most important thing. Is there still meat on the proverbial bone? Is there still stuff that you can add to training to continue this upward trajectory, right? We want that really gentle, consistent upward motion. And you do get to a point, it's like, okay, I had 16,000 meters of vert this week. That's a lot of vert. Like, I don't know that I need any more than that. That's probably plenty. So then the question is, okay, if you've maxed out vert, what else can you do? What else can you change? Are there other things that you can increase? Like, okay, could we make the workouts over on Physiological a little bit faster, a little bit harder, without doing something that's going to push you over the top? Because what you don't want is, you don't want to be peaking early. You don't want to be hitting a plateau where there's nowhere else to go up, right? And I think that in terms of that kind of patience versus confidence question, I don't think that I've hit that yet, because I do feel like as much as it's been a really good 3 weeks and I feel very confident, there's still so many things when I look at my training and I look at what I've mapped out for the next, 2.5 months, where I'm like, oh yeah, that's going to make it, that's going to improve my fitness. Like I see gains here, I see gains here, I see, other things I can focus on. So there's still a lot that I can do. And I feel like I have been patient in the sense of recognizing when I feel really good and letting myself have fun with that and push hard, but also, like we've talked about before, kind of cutting it at like when it feels like it's an 80-90% effort, never going 100% into the well. Like I haven't gone 100% to the well like this entire block. And I think that's really important. So there's still a lot of room for growth, a lot of room for improvement. And that's where I see the kind of longer term thinking of, okay, can you continue to improve over the next, 8, 10, 12 weeks, whatever it is? I think the answer is yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. There's most efforts that require endurance and perseverance have something like this. I'm reminded there's a very famous book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, who's a famous writer. And she said, basically, I write 1,500 words, I think it is, 3 pages or something a day. And once I'm done with those 3 pages, I'm done. I don't write anymore, even if I really want to. And part of the reasoning behind that is because tomorrow's coming and I'm going to have to write 3 pages tomorrow and 3 pages the next day, 3 pages the next day, and yada, yada, yada. Now, there is improvement in the way you do those things, but there's also restraint in the sense, I think, that you're talking about of not trying to go all out all the time. And there are other mechanisms that people use, and some of them may work or not, but the most consistent one I see all the time is like that. It's trying to get better at my craft, but I'm putting restraints on it. And I'm never going 100%. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. So let's talk about the block. And actually, let's talk about the whole training so far. So it's February 16th today. And, you started on the early in January. So looking back over that entire period, what stands out to you so far about your progression?
I'm really happy with how much vert I've been able to get into my legs, between both going up and down Polychowski, using the Stairmaster, using the treadmill. I think focusing on that, it's funny, I was talking to Connor about this. Like I literally never once look at what my like horizontal distance mileage is for the week until the end of the week. And then like the first like month and a half, it was like every single week, it was like 110 kilometers. I was like, that's a funny coincidence, because I just wasn't paying attention to it. I was much more focused on consistency with vert, consistency with just hours on the mountain, or on the treadmill or whatever it is, and just getting those in. And then the distance, it's like the opposite of when I was, a track and road runner, where like mileage was everything. And now it's just mileage as a byproduct of vert. So I feel really, really good about how consistent I've been. Mostly, I think consistency is number one with endurance training. It's way better to have, 8 weeks of B- workouts than an A+ and then a C- and then an A+ and then a B. And then like, if you could just have base hits, again, to make a bad sports analogy, like every day, that's all you need to do. And I think that's, I have had some really good sessions, but I've also had plenty of days where I felt really tired or I was a little bit sick or whatever it was, and I still just got that really baseline consistent training in. And that's the thing I think that I'm most proud of looking back at the, really since pretty much the first of the year, whatever, it's month and a half. I'm really, really pleased with how consistent it's been. There's really been no hiccups, no injuries. There was that one sickness, but even with that, I was still able to train through that really well and train through it in a way that was smart, where I didn't prolong the illness. I didn't overtrain or like try to squeeze too much in. I let my body recover from the illness and then move on. And then, that was last week. And now I've had a really good week after that. So I think, knock on wood, I'm over that hump. So I think I'm really pleased with the consistency, and I'm really pleased with how I've let my training adapt to my body and how it's felt while still maintaining that baseline of just getting in the kind of bare minimum that I've needed.
Great. Okay. So a month and a half, all to the good so far. We hope it continues.
So far, so good. Knock on
Anything
wood.
that we haven't discussed, that's the end of my list. Anything you want to add before we get to the cool down?
Oh, you know what? Let's talk about next week. That was something I think we should make that a habit of talking about, the next week. So next week will be a little bit interesting. I do have something that will interrupt my consistency in training, which is I have to take a trip to Europe next weekend, a short trip, but this is part of the whole Project Himalaya mystery. But I will be in Europe for, I think, about not even a week. I think it's like 5 days door to door. So it's kind of a long trip. But it will be a lot of fun to be out there, see some people who I haven't seen in a while. And yeah, I get really excited for this big project that's coming up in May. So again, I think coming off of such a great 2 months or whatever it's been, 2 blocks, month and a half, gives me a lot of confidence going into that, because I can look at that trip and be like, okay, even if I take a really low week of training, between this recovery block and then those, 5 days that I'm going to be traveling, I'm not worried about it. I feel really good with where my fitness is. And okay, even if I take a little recovery period, I have absolute confidence that I'm going to come back and I've got plenty of time. I'll be back, late February, and then I've got all of March, to, really put my nose back to the grindstone here in Quito. And then, April, we head over to Nepal. So it's, everything is coming together, and I feel like I'm playing defense now and just like trying to stay out of trouble. That's another good John Waldron quote. It's like you get to a point sometimes in training, sometimes you're like reaching for things and like trying to move up the ladder, and sometimes you're playing defense and it's just, I just need to stay out of trouble. Like I just need to not fuck up, basically. And that's kind of how I feel right now. Is like I'm just kind of waiting for like the shoe to drop or whatever the expression is, and I'm like, okay, just nothing bad, please.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
being very patient,
yes,
being
indeed.
very cautious, and I'm going to enjoy my little recovery block here with Connor, and going to enjoy a trip to Europe. So yeah, we'll have to figure out how to record this next week, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Yeah. And I hope your travels go smoothly then in that case, and you don't have any problems with plane cancellations like I did.
Yeah, no, that would be a big problem. There's a lot of people involved in this. Okay.
Yeah.
That's all I can say. Awesome. Well, let's wrap it there. We'll cut, and then we will come back and do our cool down for the week.
Yep.
Connor brought me this shirt from... Sorry,
nice.
Go ahead.
La Sportiva shirt, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Back and ready to do the cool down after we've done the warm up and the session for the week. So the topic for today's cool down is, can you be fit too early? And this is talked about in virtually every sport. Most sports, there is a season, and at the end of the season, there's a big deal happening, some sort of a championship or something or other. And there's always this talk about, well, who are the people who played great in the first part of the season, quote unquote, peaking too early? And so the question here is, can you be fit too early? So that's the first question. Can you be fit too early?
Yeah, well, can you be too fit too early? That's the real question. Obviously,
fit.
You want to be fit.
Okay, that's a good question, right? Can you peak too early?
Can you peak too early? Yeah. 100%. The answer is yes. I think there's all kinds of examples across all kinds of sports, and endurance sport, running, track and field in particular, is one where, because it's so numeric, it's really easy to see when someone is super fit super early, and then it's really easy to see if they're progressing throughout the season or if they mistimed their peak, because track and field is a sport, like you're saying, where you have usually the big thing of the year. You have the World Championships or the Olympic Games, or maybe it's the Boston Marathon, whatever it is. You have that one thing that you're building up towards, and if you are way out in front of that, people will look at that and be like, "Oh, is that good? Is that bad?" And it's actually interesting timing, because I've been thinking about this a lot for myself, which is why I wanted to talk about it today. And it's also interesting because in the track and field world, you probably don't even know this, Mr. C, but this last week and a half has been an unbelievable week in track and field. We've had I think like 5 American records, like every American record from 800, 1500 mile, 3K and 5K indoors have all been set in the last like 10 days. And which is crazy. And in those, I think 3 of them were overall world records set by Americans. And the last American to set an overall distance world record was in like 2005. And so we've seen 3 in the last week. It's crazy. Yeah. Really interesting stuff. So shout out to all those guys in track and field. I could do a whole other podcast about that. But it does beg this question of, are these guys peaking too early? Because for most of them, the most important track meet of the year is the World Championships, which are in September, and it's February. Now, track is a sport where usually you talk kind of in like 2 peaks a year. So you're looking at 6-month cycles where, okay, these guys, because Worlds is actually late this year, it probably kind of explains why these guys are so fit and fast this early, because they're able to do more of like a 2-peak thing where, okay, they can peak in February, then they take a little down period, and then they train again, and they can peak in August. But it will be really interesting to see these particular guys, if, okay, are they, going to be competitive in World Championships in September? But anyways, that's an aside. I love track. I could talk about track all the time. But the short answer to your question is yes, you can absolutely be too fit too early. I've done it. Lots of athletes have done it. And I think in endurance sport, it's particularly important because, as we were just talking about before in the main section, if you get to this point where basically there's nothing else to add to your training, there's nowhere else to go up, then usually what happens is it's really hard to hold that super high level of fitness for a long time. So that's what you run into. And then you run into injury, you run into mental burnout, and all kinds of other problems.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So it's something you have to be aware of. So can you give us some examples looking back on your career where you peaked too early or burned out and before a big effort, and what did you learn from that?
Let me answer this question in 2 ways, going back to first principles a little bit. So going back to the very first question about can you be too fit too early, I think the question that's important to answer is, why can you be too fit too early? And I think there are really 2 reasons. One is a physiological reason, which is that if you get to your maximal fitness level too early in the season, it's really, really hard to maintain your maximal fitness level. So again, if we talk about track and field as a good example of this, if let's say you're a 5K, 10K track athlete, if you get to the point where you're running a PR in the 5K, 10K, and you're at your absolute maximum ability, and you still have 8 weeks of the season left, that's not a good thing, because it's really, really hard to maintain that level of fitness. It's hard to get there, and it's even harder to stay there. So that's kind of the physiological idea. The other side is what I would call the mental and physical burnout side. And that's where you have this issue of, you can literally just get injured because the training to get to that point is hard. You have to take risks with regards to what you're doing in training. And also mentally, it's really hard just to stay that focused and stay that involved mentally in your training, in your sport, in your recovery, all the little sacrifices that you have to make. So that's I think why you can have issues with being too fit too early, are those 2 things. Now, let's go back to the question about me and like examples from my past. I've absolutely had this issue. The number one time that I think of with this is college. And I will preface this by saying it is really, really hard to coach athletes with different backgrounds of different levels to peak 3 times a year, which is what you have to do if you're a college distance coach. Because in the NCAA in America, in college, you have cross country, you have track and field indoors, and then you have track and field outdoors. So you have 3 different seasons, each have their own national championship. They're all really important. So as a college coach, you have to get someone to peak in November, to peak again in March, and then to peak again in late May, early June. That's really hard to do. I found that in my 3 years competing in the NCAA, I pretty much could only do it if I chose 2 seasons. I could, like, as someone who is always more of a distance guy, I pretty much just said, okay, I'm not really going to try and peak in indoors. I'm going to treat it more as a building towards outdoor season. But it's really hard to do. And I'm not jealous of those guys. I wouldn't want to be a college coach. It's really hard. One of the things that was a pattern with my college team at Tufts University, we're a pretty good Division III team, in cross country especially, was we would always have our best race of the year in like the second week of October, which is like 1 month too early. And all of our guys would have these huge summers. They'd like come back super fit. We'd have a really good September. And then everybody would just start absolutely ripping in October. And then what happened was, you look at the race results and they kind of go up, 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 up to October. And then they actually start to peter off and go down into November. And November is when all the important races are. It's when you have your conference meet, your regional meet, and then your national meet. And I struggled with this. My teammates struggled with it. It's really hard to do, but it was exactly that problem. It was, we got too fit too early. We were doing too many really hard sessions really early in the season, like in September and October. And then people were finding they either got injured, they got mentally burnt out, or they encountered that issue, the first one we talked about, where they literally just hit a ceiling and then you just can't maintain it that long. It's just too hard, especially when you're a college student. So what I learned from that is exactly what we were talking about in the main session here, is you always have to think about, okay, what am I going to do to keep progressing? How am I going to make my training progress? And if you don't know the answer to that question all the way from where you are now until the end of the season, you're going to have a problem, because that's the most important thing. If you can't keep progressing week to week and you're just like, oh, I'm just going to get as fit as I possibly can and then I'll just maintain that, it's almost never going to work. So that's been my experience personally. And that's kind of what I try to do with myself now, is I try to think, okay, this is great. Like my season right now is going great. I'm setting PRs, but I still see how I can progress week to week and month to month over the next 10 weeks, where I'm not doing anything outrageous and I'm not trying to maintain my absolute maximal fitness. I still feel like there's quite a bit of ceiling there.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. So you have shown some incredible fitness to date, both on Polaczowski and using your altitude thingy, and even I think you did pretty well going up Coyombe as well. So how do you think about the difference between being fit and being sharp for a specific goal?
Yeah, sharpness is an interesting word because it's used, again, I'll go back to track and field. Sharpness is usually referred to as, it's kind of the last step, is being really sharp. When we talk about sharpness in track and field, it's usually the finishing kick, the ability to change paces really quickly, which is kind of how you react in championship races. So it's almost like the finishing touches of your training block. For me, I think looking at this block, I feel very confident, but I don't feel sharp. I don't feel race ready. I don't, I wouldn't want to go and do a, super hard all out effort right now against a bunch of other fit people. I too much fatigue in my body, too much training. So there's this balance of, your training goes up and your fatigue goes up. And when you get to the end of the season, the training load can actually come down a little bit so that you're a little bit fresher, right? Without losing too much fitness. So that's a big part of sharpness, is bringing that training load down. So I think as long as I still see ways where I can increase the overall intensity and volume of the training, which I do, like that's great. And specifically with Project Himalaya, which again, I don't think I'm giving too much away by saying it is a 8,000 meter project. That's a whole other part of the training program that I'm not even going to touch that until April. Because I'll do some of the hypoxia stuff here. And actually my thing can simulate up to over 8,000 meters, but that's just, there's really no reason to touch that until you're getting quite close to whatever you're actually trying to do up that high, because that's extremely demanding on the body and you can only do so much of it. And I think it'll just be better to do it in actual mountains. So there's that. To me, that's a big piece of the puzzle that I'm just saving for way later in the season, is the real high altitude stuff. All the kind of hypoxia stuff we're doing here, it's really not that high. 7,000 meters is just not that high compared to 8,000 plus. So that kind of stuff is mostly just about data gathering and getting some basic adaptations and then making the transition into April easier. But it's still there's a lot that has to happen in April with regards to altitude and acclimatization. So for me, it's thinking about, okay, is there still room for improvement? And to me, the obvious answer is yes, because there's this whole huge piece of the puzzle that's so important that we're not even going to touch for another 6 weeks.
Okay. So lastly then, in our continuing public service to the community, what advice do you give to other athletes about managing early fitness and staying patient?
I like to think of training as like stepping stones. So every little milestone and stepping stone leads to the next one. And I think you can do this yourself, or this is where having a coach can be really helpful, is you want to ideally have a sense of both the short term and the long term. So let's say you're training for a marathon. Boston Marathon is in whatever, 2.5 months at this point. Let's say you're training for a marathon. You obviously want to understand, okay, my goal is to be able to finish the marathon or to run it in this time or at this pace, whatever that is. So that's your end goal. And then you want to kind of work backwards and say, okay, I have all these stepping stones that are going to lead me from where I am now. Maybe you're starting to train around the beginning of the year and you have 4 months. So that's a pretty standard marathon buildup. So you have these stepping stones that you're going to kind of map out along the way. So I think it's really important to celebrate each of those little accomplishments. That's great. You want to see progress week by week, or at least month by month. You should be you should be like, when you're looking at your training a month backwards, you should be, oh, hey, I can see tangible progress. I can see quantifiable progress. That's great. We should celebrate that. But you should also be able to look forward a month and see, oh, that workout is too hard. I can't do that workout right now. But if I do these little stepping stones, I know that I trust the process, and in 4 weeks, I'll be able to do that. There's this famous coach, Bill Aris, who was one of the greatest high school coaches of all time. And I literally had this written on a piece of paper on my wall in college, said, trust the process. Or no, sorry, let me restate that. It was, the process is the goal. That was what it was. That was his line. The process is the goal. That if you can embrace the process of getting a little bit better week by week and being patient, then you'll see the big gains over many weeks. And so that's kind of what I would tell people to focus on, is think about like where you are now, think about where you were a month ago, think about where you want to be a month from now, and make sure that there's room on both sides of those. Because if you don't see, oh, what can I do in my training to get to that next point? That's why it is important to map this stuff out early. And again, you don't need to map out every single workout for 16 weeks. That's outrageous. But you want to have a basic sense of, here's how I'm going to increase my volume. Here's what that curve looks like. Here's how my workouts are going to progress. Here's how my long runs are going to progress. All of those things. And you want to have it such that you always still have some room to grow. And training should always be progressive, and it should always adapt to where you actually are. So that means like good for better and for worse. So sometimes you find yourself a little bit behind the original training plan, and that's fine, and you adjust. And sometimes you find yourself ahead, and that's where, again, you want to leave yourself some room above. Like, you want to raise your ceiling a little bit and say, okay, best case scenario, if I'm 8 weeks out and I'm actually fitter than I expected, and I'm reacting really well to the training and my body is adapting well, what can I do to still continue to improve over those 8 weeks so I don't peak too early, so that I still have room to grow and improve as an athlete? So I think it's all about planning, honestly, is just having that that very general shape of what you want your buildup to look like, and you want it to be consistent, and you want it to be gradual. Those are the big things.
Okay. Yeah. It strikes me too, and I don't know what your reaction is to this, that, physical sports, people press really hard. Okay. So when you say, we're talking about fitness peaks in this case, right? And, and the question is, do you aim for, I don't know if you can even answer this, do you aim for your fitness peak? Like, let's say you want to run a half marathon or something, right? And you want to run it in some time. Do you aim for your fitness peak to be a little bit higher than that? So, because ideally, you don't want to have to run your absolute best time in the race, because that's really hard to do. What you really want is for that to be 85% of your capability or 90%. So you've got it in you. And even on a kind of a slightly off day, you're going to get there. Now, if you're a professional competitive athlete, in your case, maybe it's a little different because you're pushing very hard against the best in the world. And if you don't have a great day, maybe you don't make it. If the winner of the Boston Marathon doesn't have the best day, even they could have. It's probably pretty hard to break the record, things like that. But so I don't know if there's differences for the professionals versus the amateurs. Does this make sense, this question?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think that what you're getting at is where do you set your goal relative to your ability, right? So, if you're a a weekend warrior kind of runner, and let's say you're trying to qualify for the Boston Marathon, that's a really common goal. Maybe what we actually do is we shoot to have you 5 minutes under qualifying time. That's like on your A+ day. And what that allows us to do is we go into the race, we have an A goal, we have a B goal, and we have a C goal. So your A goal is, say, 250, your B goal is 254, and your C goal is just qualify. And what that allows you to do is exactly what you're saying is, okay, I don't need to have a perfect day to be really stoked with this outcome. Now, that is different because if you're an elite athlete, if you're competing at the Olympic Games, you better have your best day of the year at the Olympic Games, or else the person who wins the Olympics has their best day at the Olympic Games, kind of by definition, right? Unless you're so much better that you can have an off day and still win,
right? Yeah,
right. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Like you say, exactly. Like Usain Bolt could have a B- day and still win the 100 meters in like 2012 or something, right? But most people aren't Usain Bolt even in the Olympics. Mostly the races are much closer than that.
Right.
So really it is a manifestation. And that is probably the hardest part of training, is getting everything right, fitness-wise, peaking-wise, strategy-wise, and execution-wise on one day for one race. That is probably the hardest part of any training for endurance sport, at least. FKT stuff that I'm doing is actually almost easier because I get to pick what day I go. So if I wake up and I have the flu, I can push my record attempt back a week. If I wake up and I have, and the weather is bad, we could go to tomorrow. So you have that level of flexibility. Whereas if it's the Olympics, the World Championships, whatever it is, you could look up right now what time the World Championship 1500 men's final is in September. And if you're not ready to go on that day, sorry, they're not going to hold the race for you. If you have food poisoning, doesn't matter. So I think it's tremendously hard to do that. And, that is why, in theory, if we're as professional athletes, we want our absolute 100% best performance to be on the race day at the time when we're racing. In real life, sometimes that happens. And that's when you have these almost like out of body experiences in races, when everything just clicks and it's the most incredible thing. But realistically, what happens is most of the time it's not perfect. It's a B+ at best. And this goes back to what we've talked about a bunch of times in all sports, is really being excellent is about having your average be really high, so that your average day is really, really, really good. And then every once in a while you have those huge exceptional days, and those are the days that can define your whole career. But really it's about, can your days that are, your B+, A- days, can those be good enough that you can win an Olympic medal or something, or set a world record, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's really what it's about.
To be really nerdy about it, what I think about is really elite professionals lower the standard deviation enormously of their performance. Yep. So, the professional tennis players, they almost always hit the center of the racket, even when they're running like crazy, even when they're way off balance, they almost always hit the center of the racket. Whereas an amateur hits the center of the racket, if they're lucky, maybe every other time, a good amateur. Yeah. So there's that discrimination and lack of variance, right? So much lower standard deviation. And I think the same thing is true of runners. So yeah, if you can squeeze that difference between the best performance and the next best performance and the next best performance, that's when you become a really elite athlete. So congratulations, since you're already one of them. You've squeezed a lot, and hopefully we'll squeeze some more. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's great. It's a really interesting topic. And both as a coach and an athlete, it's something I think about all the time. So I think for me, I'm trying to be patient and just enjoying being fit, but also recognizing that there's a lot more work to come. And that's the important part.
Okay.
Awesome.
We'll talk next week.
Well, thank you everybody for listening. Again, I will just repeat what I said at the beginning if you missed it. A quick favor, if you are enjoying this episode, we've got some awesome feedback. First of all, please send us feedback, but also please do the whole comment, subscribe thing, whatever platform you're on, whether you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really does help other people find us. And also just tell a friend or two, shoot them a text message with this link. If you love it, we would love to see this grow and help other people. It really helps us, and we're having a blast doing it. So thank you guys who have already done that, and please go ahead and keep doing that. Again, like I said before, please send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, hopes, dreams. You can send those to me, ty@chosky.run, or DM me, Tyler C. Andrews, on Instagram. Remember, you can read my raw training logs. I love reading. If you want to go read stuff, you can do that. It's on my blog at tylercandrews.com, or you can get that delivered to you via Substack at tylercandrews.substack.com. Ty's Training is a Chosky Media production, and we will be back next week with more of Project Himalaya. Thank you guys. We'll see you then. Ciao.